The regulatory vice tightened down again just yesterday on existing DeFi, and this should be a huge wake-up call for projects building on Cardano. Ready? Let's go. This news from yesterday is going to be spun as no big deal, but we've been talking about this for months, and we've been talking about this exact thing all week. This is no longer the same SEC we used to have. This is a Gensler-led SEC. They understand crypto and they know who to go after. So just because you code something and then release it into the wild, if the purpose of that code was to allow people to do things that would normally be illegal, I don't think you can assume you're safe just because you released it in the wild. Yesterday we saw Uniswap Labs come out and announce that they are censoring their user interface so as to not allow certain tokens. What types of tokens, you might ask? These types of tokens: mirrored Tesla, mirrored Microsoft, mirrored Facebook, mirrored Alibaba, M Google, MUS Oil, mirrored Amazon, yield $1. Are you noticing a pattern here? This is exactly what Gensler, head of the SEC, was talking about in the speech we've been covering all week: synthetics. He straight up told us, hey, if you are dealing in crypto assets that provide synthetic exposure to gains and losses of securities, we're going to treat those crypto assets as securities. Uniswap Labs obviously got the memo, and they decided, hey, this is not good. This is going to lead to us getting in trouble. So we are not going to allow those to be traded through our user interface. If you're an Ethereum maximalist right now, you're probably jumping out of your chair so that you can very excitedly point out that that is the user interface, not the protocol. And if you wanted to build your own user interface, you could still trade synthetics directly through the smart contract. Of course. But it's very obvious, and Hayden Adams, founder of Uniswap, is pointing that out right here. But it's a big deal that Uniswap Labs is acknowledging that there is regulatory liability. I mean, they haven't directly acknowledged this, but we can imply through their actions that they're acknowledging that there's regulatory liability in the trading of synthetics after that Gensler speech. And it's only a couple days. It's been a couple days, and they've already removed that functionality from their user interface. Here's the deal. What we're calling synthetics in crypto has really been around for 150 years, and it's been illegal for 100 years. It's been illegal for over 100 years. This is what traditionally has been called bucketeering. You're running a bucket shop. A bucket shop is where people could go in, allow themselves to accept the illusion that they're trading in stocks. Instead, what they were doing is they were going to these bucket shops, and the bucketeers were allowing them to place bets on whether or not securities would go up or down. They could go in there and they would place bets, and it would feel like they were trading on the stock market, but there were no stocks, there were no securities actually trading hands in these bucket shops. The bucketeers were just bookies taking bets on whether or not securities would go up or down. And it would look quite sophisticated. It would look extremely sophisticated. You might have quotes of all kinds of securities inside the bucket shop, and it might look all official, but you're basically just placing bets on whether or not certain securities would go up or down. Of course, this was deemed not to be good for a healthy and well-functioning economy, and it was outlawed. Here, Wikipedia is telling us it had largely been legislated or regulated out of existence by the 1920s. But of course, we're crypto, so we just reinvent it in crypto, call it by another name. Pretend like there's no way regulators can possibly regulate it, because in crypto, we're decentralized, except that, of course, people don't completely abide by the ethos of decentralization. We have Uniswap, which is also there's Uniswap, sort of the decentralized finance concept. And then there's also Uniswap Labs, which is a company. It's a corporate entity. and they own this user interface. And so, of course, we don't have actual decentralization, and they can be regulated. Of course, Ethereum DeFi maximalists have already begun spinning this and telling us it's such a minor event, it's hardly worth taking note of. The smart contracts are still there, not even a big deal. But I think probably more prudent voices, even in the Ethereum community, are already sounding the alarm that this is a big deal. Here we have one person posting on Twitter after this news was announced, and that's the end of Uniswap, laugh out loud. This is just a centralized exchange with more steps and fees now. Another person posted, at this point, I'm assuming every blue chip Silicon Valley backed DeFi project got an SEC subpoena last week. And he made it very clear that he is just speculating here. And he even said somebody from a DeFi project reached out to him and said that they don't believe that that's the case. But other people are even extending this to oracles. This person is making fun of Chainlink here and says, when regulators will ask how these synths are possible and who is the single entity responsible for providing the necessary data to them, y'all will see just how bad it is to have a private KYC oracle network censorable by their own design. This poster summed it up by saying, turns out the Uniswap was quite stoppable. This isn't some kind of game. It's a matter of what can be stopped by nation states and what cannot. People are already pointing out how this has been super obvious for a long time, that this was all going to come down. This poster is even referring back to a post he made back in, looks like April, where he said, he pointed out that it's a common thought that boils down to, hey, why not just blatantly violate federal law and hope they can't catch us? And he pointed out back in April, looks like, that that's not workable, especially for serious financial use. The federal government is just not going to allow the continued operation of unregistered securities exchange, no matter what you call it. AMM, swap pools, no matter what label you put on it, the US government is just not going to allow this to exist. They're not going to allow this to be accessible to US consumers. But we don't just have commentators posting about regulatory activity. We see Michael Arrington here saying, my day began with a man I just met poking me in the belly and telling me I look just like Chris Christie, which is pretty hilarious, and ended with an SEC subpoena on a deal we invested in. We don't actually know what he was talking about. And that was on purpose. He didn't want to tell us what the subpoena was about, but we do know that his company, Arrington Capital, yeah, they're involved with XRP. So it could have been something related to the XRP litigation, the Ripple litigation that's going on. But if you look at their portfolio of companies, there's also a ton of DeFi in here. I mean, just scrolling for, half a second, we already have Mirror is a protocol for the creation and exchange of permissionless synthetic assets built on the Terra blockchain. I mean, they've got all kinds of DeFi stuff in here. And it could have been any one of these projects that they got the subpoena over, or all of them. Obviously, all of this is happening on blockchains other than Cardano, notably Ethereum, but this should be instructive for any DeFi projects building on Cardano. If you're building a project and you intend to occupy the synthetic space, you should probably be taking a look at this. If you're partnered with a project that intends to occupy the synthetic space, this should probably be instructive, right? It turns out it's looking very clear that you cannot create synthetic exposure to securities. If that's part of your business model, that's it. Good chance that's not going to work out here. I think this all relates to this myth in crypto. I'm going to go ahead and call it a myth. People will disagree with this, but I'm going to call it a myth. There's this, and this myth is this story. It's this story that you can go ahead and code something knowing that the primary purpose of that thing is going to be to violate federal law. And then you sort of push it out into the wild, and probably you retain a bunch of governance tokens. That's a separate issue. But you push this thing out in the wild, and then people use it for what exactly what you intended it for, to help them violate federal law. And, insert whatever nation you want, right? The laws of your nation. Insert whatever country you want. There's this myth that somehow the relevant regulators in your country are not going to go after you because it's decentralized, because the system runs by itself. It runs by itself, and you had nothing to do with the actual violation of laws, even though you designed and coded and implemented the system that enabled that violation of the law, and you knew that was going to be the primary use of it. Before we get into a little bit of a line drawing exercise, you can imagine, let's say, selling a blowtorch to somebody. It's okay to sell a blowtorch to somebody. That's all right. There's probably nothing illegal about that in a lot of jurisdictions. But if someone comes to you and they say, hey, I'm going to break into this house and they've got a safe and I'm going to steal all the money out of the safe and I need a blowtorch for that. If you know that blowtorch is going to be used to rob this safe, that's a different scenario than if you are just a blowtorch salesman and you sell someone a blowtorch. If somebody comes to you and they say, hey, I want this blowtorch because I'm going to use it to go rob this safe in this person's house, and I'm going to use the money out of the safe to come back and pay you for the blowtorch afterwards, then you're going to catch some kind of charge, right? And so we get in this line drawing exercise with, let's say a platform. If you code a platform and, it's, the platform is an email platform. Of course, people could use your emails to enable crimes. They could use it to, send messages to people and scam them out of their crypto. Not illegal for you to code that email platform. But if you create a platform, and let's say it's like a launch pad or anything like that, and the sole purpose of that is going to be to execute illegal distributions of securities for value, then I don't think you should feel like you are safe from the regulators who might come after you, like the SEC. If you create an unregistered stock exchange, knowing that people are going to trade synthetics on it, you probably shouldn't rest easy. If you create an Oracle solution, like the poster we covered in this video referred to, if you create an Oracle solution, knowing that one of the primary uses of that Oracle solution is going to be to enable unregistered illegal stock exchanges, bucket shops of synthetics, then you probably shouldn't feel safe from regulators, because the Gensler SEC, they actually understand crypto and they know who the puppeteers are. Even if you created the puppet show and you pulled all the strings to make all this possible, the Gensler SEC, they might go after you. And there might be some test cases of this. They might, a lot of these projects it looks like they might go after some big projects that have a lot of bucks and a big war chest to fight the SEC like Ripple's doing. But do you want to be involved in that? Do you want to live under that regulatory scrutiny? Right now, we're seeing things that seem to be related to synthetics, but we don't know where this is going to go next. This regulatory trend is like a dangerous octopus lurking in the shadows whose tentacles could spread throughout DeFi. I mean, is this gonna spread to launch pads next? What about, launch pads, you could argue some launch pads, there are probably regulators out there who would argue that some launch pads in crypto are enabling the same kinds of distribution of securities that we saw in the 2017 ICO craze. And I think everybody at this point agrees that a lot of those ICOs were illegal sales of securities. Regulators could start looking at the launch pads next. What about all the crypto loan stuff? I don't see a lot of those loan projects providing the same kind of disclosures that would be required by virtually any other commercial actor who is providing loans. So what if they go after the crypto lending next? What's left? What is there in DeFi? What is there in DeFi that wouldn't be subject to a pretty heavy regulatory framework if it was happening in the legacy systems. I think people need to ask themselves, are we doing something in crypto that would have would have to comply with regulations if it were happening outside of crypto? And maybe people should look at just complying with those regulations, right? Because the theme seems to be that the things that are illegal outside of crypto are maybe illegal in crypto too. And this goes against the myth, the narrative that we've always told ourselves, and sort of like push code out into the wild. And after you do that, you're not responsible for what is done with that code, despite, you possibly knowing exactly what it was going to be used for when you created it and pushed it out into the world. Satoshi got away with this. He created a whole monetary system that, probably would have been illegal if he had been not anonymous and he had said, "Hey, I'm I'm not anonymous. Here's my real identity. I just invented Bitcoin. Let's kick this baby off." Good chance Satoshi could have gotten into trouble for Bitcoin. The only reason he got away with it was because he was completely anonymous and there was no way to stop it. But these DeFi projects are, in a lot of cases, not anonymous. And this is sort of a catch-22. The DeFi projects we have today, it looks like a lot of them are not anonymous. And that's great because we have some real people who will be accountable for what happens in that DeFi project. If we had anonymous founders of all the DeFi projects, that provides makes it much harder for them to be apprehended if regulators decide that they've done something inappropriate. But that also brings with it the possibility of rug pulls later on. If there's a DeFi project with governance tokens or something like that, and the founders are anonymous, we found that to be kind of the recipe for rug pulls down the road. So there's a little bit of a catch-22. We don't want anonymous founders because of rug pulls and things like that. And yet at the same time, if we have known entities behind these DeFi projects, it's very unclear whether or not there are any safe harbors in DeFi, whether there's anything in DeFi that regulators couldn't go after if there's a target to go after. Uniswap Labs obviously thought they were a target who could have been on the receiving end of some kind of cease and desist or something if they continued to allow synthetics to be traded through their user interface. And we don't know at this point. It could be they're already in talks with regulators. It could be they're talking to regulators and they offered this up. Maybe this is how, maybe this is their way of dealing with the regulators they're already in contact with. Maybe this was a preemptory move based on Gensler's comments. We don't know at this point. Judging from all the comments on this move by Uniswap, I think it's safe to say that the Ethereum DeFi community did not see this coming. And I think as we think about Cardano DeFi, it's safe to assume that if we're thinking about it over a longer timeline, 2 years, 5 years, 7 years, anything like that, I think it's safe to assume that as you get further down the timeline, there are going to be DeFi use cases that we think exist today that are going to be regulated out of existence by the time we get further down the timeline. And it's not exactly clear to me what things in DeFi might be safe from that. Maybe it's all of DeFi. Maybe DeFi is a little bit of an illusion and you can't really have DeFi. This is possible. Maybe you can't really have DeFi with any centralized entities or any known persons involved, because they will become regulatory targets unless they comply with exactly the same regulations that their legacy counterparts do. And let's face it, if every DeFi project had to comply with the same regulations their legacy counterparts do, the appeal of a lot of these projects would be much, much less. This looks like just the beginning of a much bigger trend that will probably have a significant impact on DeFi, and it's not clear that there are any safe harbors. I don't think anybody could carve out pieces of DeFi right now and say, okay, that piece is safe. I could be completely wrong, but I have a sneaking suspicion that this may be true to such an extent that we look back on this once we're down the road a little ways and we realize we put too much focus on DeFi. We put too many resources on DeFi. We should have focused on real world blockchain applications that weren't going to be regulated out of existence or regulated to the point that they're no longer interesting. Only time will tell. I will talk to you tomorrow.